A royal guard walked into a hospital at midnight, carrying a wounded girl in his arms. Blood covered his uniform. No ID, no explanation, no witnesses. Security immediately surrounded him. Police were called. Everyone assumed the worst. But what they discovered next left the entire hospital speechless. So what really happened that night? Before we reveal it, smash that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The rain hammered London's empty streets like bullets on metal, turning every surface into a mirror that reflected the amber glow of streetlights. It was past midnight when Lance Corporal Tristan Hale took his usual shortcut through the back alleys off Sherrington Walk. His ceremonial duties had ended hours ago, but military habits die hard. His stride still carried that parade ground precision, even in civilian clothes. Well, mostly civilian. His dark trousers still bore the red stripe of the household cavalry, and his polished black boots clicked against wet pavement with rhythmic purpose. The rain had soaked through his white undershirt, fabric clinging uncomfortably to his shoulders, but Hale barely noticed. After 2 tours in Afghanistan and 6 years standing guard at the most famous palaces in the world, a bit of London drizzle was nothing. The streets felt different at this hour, quieter, more honest somehow. No tourists with cameras, no crowds pressing against barriers for photos. Just the city breathing in the dark, washing itself clean for another day. Hale preferred it this way. The London that existed between the performances, when ceremony gave way to simple reality. 28 years old, King's Life Guard, trained in everything from crowd control to combat medicine. Tonight, all that training was about to matter more than any ceremony ever had. He'd walked this route countless times, quiet, narrow, the kind of shortcut locals used to avoid the tourist crowds and late-night pub chaos. Street cleaners had already been through. Most windows were dark, just the steady patter of rain and the distant hum of traffic on the main road. But something was wrong. Hale slowed his pace, that sixth sense, developed through years of watching for threats beginning to whisper warnings. Movement near the industrial bins had caught his peripheral vision. Too deliberate for an animal, too small for an adult. The rhythm was off. Not the steady rustle of someone settling in for shelter, but something broken and uncertain. He turned toward the shadows, rain drumming against his shoulders. There, crumpled behind a large skip like discarded rubbish, was a child. A girl, maybe 10 years old, slumped against the brick wall with her head lolling sideways. Even in the dim light from the distant street lamp, Hale could see the damage. Her clothes were torn, not just dirty, but shredded, as if she'd been dragged. One small arm scraped raw and stretched out at an unnatural angle. Dark stains covered her dress, too thick and too dark for rainwater. Hale's breathing steadied. His expression didn't change, but every muscle in his body shifted into a different mode. The same cold focus that had kept him alive in Helmand Province, alert, assessing, ready for whatever came next. He approached slowly, boots silent on the wet pavement, eyes sweeping the shadows for movement. Empty alley behind him. No footsteps echoing from the street. No figure watching from doorways or windows, just this broken little girl and the sound of his own heartbeat suddenly loud in his ears. The smell hit him as he got closer, blood, fresh and metallic, too much of it. He approached slowly, scanning the area first. No movement in the shadows. No footsteps echoing from the alley mouth. No adult figure lurking nearby. Just this broken little girl, and the sound of his own heartbeat, suddenly loud in his ears. Crouching beside her, he pressed 2 fingers gently against her neck. Pulse, weak but steady. Her breathing was shallow, laboured, each exhale barely moving her chest. He lifted her eyelid carefully. Pupils reactive but sluggish. Classic signs of shock and blood loss. "Hey, sweetheart," he said quietly, voice steady despite what he was seeing. "Can you hear me?" No response. Her skin was cold despite the mild night, that clammy dampness that had nothing to do with rain. His mind automatically catalogued what he was seeing, years of training, sorting information into actionable priorities. This wasn't random violence, too methodical, too isolated. Someone had brought her here deliberately, hurt her deliberately, then left her to die in this forgotten corner of London. The thought made something cold and dangerous settle in his chest. But anger was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. Focus on the mission. Keep her alive. His eyes swept her injuries with clinical precision. Triage training taking over. Abrasions on her arms and legs. Painful but not life-threatening. Bruising around her wrists that made his jaw clench. Dark fingerprints pressed into pale skin. But the real problem was the dark patch spreading across her side where fabric clung wet to skin. Blood. Fresh blood. A lot of it. The wound was still actively bleeding, which meant it was recent. Very recent. Whoever did this might still be close by, might be watching from the shadows even now. Hale's shoulders tensed as he glanced around the alley again, but he forced himself to stay focused on the girl. She was the mission now. Everything else was secondary. In Afghanistan, he'd seen what happened when you waited too long, when paperwork mattered more than bleeding, when protocol killed people who could have been saved. Hale had been certified in battlefield trauma response during his military training, drilled until the procedures became instinct. The lesson hammered into every soldier's head: control the bleeding, maintain the airway, prevent shock. Everything else was secondary to keeping them alive long enough to reach real medical care. He peeled off his white undershirt, still dry beneath his jacket despite the rain, and wadded the cotton against the wound on her side. She stirred slightly at the pressure, a small whimper escaping her lips that sounded too old for someone so young. That was good. Unconscious but responsive meant her brain was still getting oxygen. But her temperature was dropping fast, and he had no idea how long she'd been lying here. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. No phone. Regulations prohibited personal devices during ceremonial duties, and old habits meant he'd left his mobile in his locker. No other civilians in sight to call for help. The nearest main road was 8 blocks away through empty streets. In Afghanistan, when a casualty was critical and evacuation was faster than waiting for a medevac, you carried, you moved, you got them to safety. Decision made. Hale lifted her carefully, one arm supporting her back, the other maintaining pressure on the makeshift bandage. She was lighter than he'd expected, too light. He cradled her against his chest, her head settling against his shoulder as he began to walk. Not the careful, measured pace of ceremony, but the urgent stride of a soldier carrying wounded. Past the closed shops, past the few late-night stragglers huddled under bus stops. A taxi driver honked once at the sight, bloodied man in military trousers carrying an unconscious child. But Hale didn't break stride. His arms began to ache after 4 blocks. Rain mixed with blood on his hands, making his grip slippery. The girl's breathing grew more laboured with each step, small puffs of air against his neck that were becoming worryingly irregular. By the time the hospital's blue emergency signs came into view, Hale's shirt was soaked through with rain and blood. His arms trembled with fatigue, but his pace never faltered. The automatic doors of accident and emergency sensed his approach and slid open with a mechanical hiss. Fluorescent lighting flooded over them both as he stepped inside. And everything stopped. The scattered handful of people in the waiting area, night shift nurses, a few patients with minor complaints, security guard checking his rounds, all turned to stare. The man in dark trousers with the ceremonial red stripe, soaked white undershirt clinging to his frame, regulation boots leaving wet prints across the polished floor. and in his arms, a child, half-dressed, bleeding, unconscious. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Hale stepped forward to the reception desk, his voice cutting through the stillness with military precision. "I need a trauma doctor, now." The triage nurse snapped to attention, her training overriding her shock. "Sir, what happened?" "She's been assaulted. Significant blood loss, possible internal injuries. I've applied pressure, but she needs surgery immediately." The nurse's eyes flicked between the girl's pale face and the blood staining Hale's arms. "Is she your daughter?" "No." "Do you know her name?" "No. I found her unconscious in an alley off Sherrington Walk. No guardian present, no identification. She was critical. I didn't have time to wait for an ambulance." Professional instincts kicked in. The nurse reached for her phone while calling out, "I need a trauma team to Bay 3. Female child, approximately 10 years old, unconscious with abdominal trauma, code red." A second nurse appeared with a gurney, but hesitated at arm's length. The blood, the circumstances, the man with military bearing who'd appeared from nowhere, carrying someone else's child. "We'll take her from here," she said carefully. "I'll lay her down myself," Hale replied. He placed the girl gently onto the stretcher, keeping pressure on the bloodied shirt pressed against her side until a nurse's gloved hand replaced his. Dark red had soaked through the white fabric completely. "BP is 80/60, pupils sluggish," the trauma nurse muttered as they wheeled her toward the treatment area. They disappeared through double doors, leaving Hale standing in the sudden quiet of the waiting area. Blood covered his hands to the wrists. His undershirt hung loose and damp. The red stripe on his trousers caught the harsh hospital lighting. The receptionist cleared her throat. "Sir, I need to get your name for our records." "Hale, Lance Corporal, Household Division." "And your relationship to the child?" "I don't have one. I found her." The woman's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Behind the reception desk, someone whispered urgently into a phone. Another staff member appeared, hospital security, a large man with a radio clipped to his vest. "Sir," the security guard said, approaching slowly, "I'm going to need you to come with me for a few questions. Just procedure." Hale nodded once. "Of course." "Have you got any ID?" "At my barracks. I came directly from finding her." Security exchanged a look with the charge nurse. Around the waiting area, conversations had stopped. Everyone was watching now. The bloodied man in military dress being escorted away from the trauma bay, where a wounded child fought for her life. "This way, please," the guard said. As they walked toward a side corridor, Hale heard whispers trailing behind them. "He just walked in, carrying her. All that blood on his hands. Says he doesn't even know her name." The corridor they led him to wasn't quite an interrogation room, but it felt like one. Cream-coloured walls, plastic chairs that had seen better days, a vending machine humming in the corner. Lance Corporal Tristan Hale sat where directed, back straight, hands resting on his knees, posture unchanged despite everything that had happened. A junior doctor entered first, nervous energy radiating from him like heat. Fresh out of medical school, probably his first real trauma case. He glanced at Hale's blood-stained appearance and nodded to the security guard hovering by the door. "She's in surgery now, internal bleeding. We're doing everything we can." Hale's only response was a tight nod. "You can wash up if you'd like," a nurse offered, gesturing toward a small sink in the corner. "I'll wait." "The blood. It might make other people uncomfortable." "I'm not here for their comfort." Before anyone could respond, 2 uniformed officers entered. Metropolitan Police, the older one, Detective Sergeant Miller, carried himself with the wary confidence of someone who'd seen too much. His partner, Constable Nguyen, was younger, tablet in hand, watching Hale with undisguised suspicion. "Evening," Miller said, flipping open a notebook with practiced efficiency. "You're Lance Corporal Hale?" "Correct." "You brought the girl in?" "Yes." Miller's pen hovered over paper. Want to tell us how that came about? Hale's voice remained steady, measured, each word precise as a parade command. I found her behind a skip on Sherrington Walk. She was unconscious and bleeding heavily. I performed basic field first aid and carried her here. Time frame? Approximately 0030 hours when I discovered her. Arrived here at 0047. Miller's pen scratched across paper. Any witnesses to you finding her? No. Security cameras in the area? I don't know. I wasn't concerned with surveillance. I was concerned with getting her medical attention. You didn't call emergency services. I had no phone. Military regulations prohibit personal devices during ceremonial duties. The girl was critical. I responded according to my training. Nguyen looked up from her tablet, eyes narrowing, which was combat field triage. When evacuation is faster than waiting for medical transport, you carry the casualty to safety. You walked her here. 8 blocks? Yes. That's unusual, Miller said, exchanging a glance with his partner. Most people would have called for help, flagged down a car, found someone with a phone. Hale's expression didn't change. Most people aren't trained medics. She was going into shock. Every minute mattered. What's unusual, he continued, voice carrying that edge soldiers use when explaining something that should be obvious, is leaving a dying child in an alley because of administrative procedure. The room fell quiet for a moment. Even the security guard shifted uncomfortably. Do you understand how this looks? Miller continued. Man appears at hospital, middle of the night, carrying unconscious child covered in blood. No witnesses, no ID, no prior relationship with the victim. I understand completely, and I'd do exactly the same thing again. You don't seem concerned about being a suspect. Should I be? I know what I did. I know why I did it. If that makes me a suspect, then your job is harder than mine. Do you understand how this looks? Miller continued. Man appears at hospital, middle of the night, carrying unconscious child covered in blood. No witnesses, no ID, no prior relationship with the victim. I understand, and I'd do exactly the same thing again. Nguyen leaned forward. You don't know her name? No, she was unresponsive when I found her. Any idea who she was with? Where she came from? No. The alley was empty except for her. Miller studied him carefully. You realize we have to rule you out as a suspect? Of course. No arguments. Most people get defensive when we suggest they might be involved. Most people aren't trained soldiers who understand the necessity of proper procedure. Hale's gaze was steady, unflinching. You're doing your job. I did mine. The officers exchanged another look. This wasn't the response they'd expected. We'll need your clothes for evidence, Nguyen said. They're yours. Would you be willing to wait here until we finish collecting statements? Yes. Miller closed his notebook, studying Hale's unwavering composure. You're not under arrest, but don't leave the hospital. I wouldn't leave until I know she's safe. After the officers departed, leaving him alone with the security guard, Hale finally allowed his shoulders to drop slightly. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the slow burn of exhaustion and something deeper. The weight of carrying someone else's broken child through London's empty streets. He looked toward the doors where she'd been taken, and for the first time since finding her, allowed himself to hope she would survive. The automatic doors burst open with unusual force, admitting a woman who stumbled through like she'd been running for miles. Her coat hung half-buttoned, hair plastered to her skull by rain, mascara streaking dark lines down her cheeks. She moved with the jerky desperation of someone whose world had just collapsed and been put back together wrong. Behind her, a man followed, face pale as winter, jaw clenched so tight the muscles stood out like cables. He scanned the reception area with the desperate intensity of someone hunting for answers that might not exist. That's them, a nurse whispered from behind the desk. The woman nearly collapsed against the reception counter, gripping its edge with white knuckles. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "My daughter, Emily Harding. 10 years old. They called us, said she was brought in." The triage nurse stood immediately, her professional calm a stark contrast to the mother's barely controlled panic. "Yes, she's in surgery right now. Please, if you'll come this way." "Where is she?" The mother's voice rose to just below a scream. "Who brought her? What happened to my baby? They wouldn't tell us anything on the phone, just said to come immediately." The father placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, but his own voice was tight with barely contained emotion. "We've been searching for hours. Called everyone we know, drove through every street in our neighbourhood." The receptionist gestured subtly toward the observation corridor, where Hale waited, still motionless, despite everything happening around him. Emily's father followed the nurse's gaze and locked eyes with the blood-stained figure sitting on the plastic chair. Military bearing even in civilian clothes, spine straight despite exhaustion. Ceremonial stripes still visible on his dark trousers. Dried blood rimming his fingernails like evidence of something terrible. "Is that him?" the father asked, voice dropping to a whisper. Detective Sergeant Miller appeared at their elbow. "That's the man who brought her in. He's being questioned but isn't under arrest." "Yet," Nguyen muttered from behind them, not quite under her breath. The mother's face went white. She swayed on her feet, gripping the counter harder. "What does that mean? Did he hurt her?" Before anyone could answer, the father stepped forward. Not aggressive, but deliberate. Reading something in Hale's posture that others had missed. The way his hands rested flat on his thighs, completely still. Not fidgeting like someone with something to hide. Not defensive, like someone preparing for confrontation. Just present. "He's military," the man said quietly. Miller nodded. "Claims to be household division. Says he found her unconscious behind a skip, no phone to call it in. Carried her here on foot." Emily's mother swayed on her feet, catching herself against the wall. She ran off after fighting with her sister. "We searched everywhere, called all her friends. We thought she was just being dramatic, hiding somewhere to make us worry." "Did you see anything unusual before she disappeared?" Miller asked. The father's expression darkened. "There was a man, across the street when we were calling for her. Hood up, white trainers. He crossed to the other side when I shouted Emily's name, but I didn't think—" His voice trailed off. Miller's attention sharpened. "Can you describe him?" "Mid-30s, maybe, taller than me. Moved quickly when he heard us calling her name, like he didn't want to be noticed." A uniformed officer approached with a radio crackling to life. "Sir, we've got something." Miller stepped aside to listen, then returned with a grim expression. "CCTV picked up someone matching that description 15 minutes before this gentleman appeared on camera. Same area, same time frame." The father looked back at Hale, who hadn't moved from his position. "He wasn't wearing a hood, and he doesn't move like someone trying to hide." Emily's mother followed her husband's gaze. "The man I saw had different clothes, casual. This one's got military bearing." Another officer approached with a tablet. "Ma'am, we've got enhanced footage from the street cameras. The individual your husband described appears in our database. Prior convictions for child endangerment and indecent conduct." The air in the waiting area seemed to shift. Miller turned to study Hale with new eyes. "And this man? Clean background check. Military record confirms he finished ceremonial duties at 1800 hours, signed out properly. No complaints, no incidents. Medal citations for conduct under fire." Detective Inspector Lorraine Cutler arrived just as Miller was processing this information. She moved with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been pulled from a warm bed into London's rain, coat dripping, ponytail still damp. "Status?" she asked briskly. Miller handed her the tablet. "CCTV confirms another individual at the scene, matches known offender profile. This one's clean." Cutler studied the screen, then looked toward Hale. He's the one who brought her in. Carried her 8 blocks. Applied field dressing to stop the bleeding. Probably saved her life. Before Cutler could respond, her radio crackled. She lifted it to her ear, listened for 30 seconds, then lowered it with a satisfied expression. They've got him. 2 streets east, attempting to flee on foot. Blood on his clothing, child's mobile phone in his jacket. Resisted arrest. The mother gasped. Emily's father closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Cutler approached Hale's corridor. "Lance Corporal!" He looked up. "You're free to go, with our thanks." Hale's expression didn't change. "How is she?" "Still in surgery, but the doctors say if you hadn't acted as quickly as you did, hadn't known to apply pressure where you did." She paused. "She wouldn't have made it." For the first time since arriving, something shifted in Hale's posture. Not relief exactly, but the slight easing of tension he'd been carrying since finding her broken and bleeding in that alley. "Can I wait until she's stable?" Cutler nodded. "Of course." As she walked away, Emily's parents approached slowly. The father extended his hand first. "They told us what you did." Hale stood, accepting the handshake with military formality. "You found our daughter, treated her wounds, carried her to safety when you could have just called it in and walked away." Hale's voice was quiet. "She needed help immediately." The mother stepped forward, tears starting fresh. "Because of you, she's alive, because you didn't hesitate, didn't wait for someone else to handle it." She didn't ask permission before wrapping her arms around him, brief, desperate, grateful. Hale stood perfectly still for a moment, then gently placed one hand on her back before stepping away. A nurse appeared, holding a sealed plastic bag containing his ceremonial tunic, the one he'd used to stop Emily's bleeding. The fabric was stained dark red, despite attempts to clean it. "Your uniform," she said softly. Hale looked at the bundle of crimson wool and tarnished brass buttons, the pride of the household division, now marked permanently by someone else's blood. He didn't take it. "Keep it," he said simply. "She lived. That's what matters." The double doors to the surgical wing opened, admitting a tired-looking surgeon still wearing scrubs. Emily's parents rushed toward him, but the doctor's expression was calm. "She's stable. We've repaired the internal damage. She'll need time to recover, but she's going to be fine." The waiting area erupted in quiet relief. Emily's mother collapsed into her husband's arms. Several nurses smiled, despite their professional composure. Hale didn't celebrate. He simply nodded once. The same measured response he'd given to every question, every update, every moment of this endless night. Then he turned toward the exit. No dramatic departure. No slow walk past admiring faces. Just the quiet gait of a soldier who'd done what needed doing and had no interest in recognition for it. But as he reached the automatic doors, Emily's father called out one more time. "Wait, please!" Hale stopped but didn't turn around. "At least tell us, why did you stop? Most people would have kept walking, called it in later, let someone else deal with it. But you stopped. You risked everything for a stranger." For a long moment, Hale was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet the father had to strain to hear it. "Because she reminded me of someone. Your daughter. My sister. 20 years ago, someone hurt her too, but no one stopped. No one helped. She didn't make it." The words hung in the air like a confession. Emily's father felt his throat tighten. "I'm sorry," he said. Hale finally turned around, just slightly. "Don't be sorry. Just remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to look away." As the automatic doors closed behind him, Emily's father watched his retreating figure disappear into the London night. "We don't even know his first name," he said quietly. The nurse checking her charts looked up. "Tristan. Lance Corporal Tristan Hale." "Tristan," Emily's mother repeated softly. We'll remember that. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The streets gleamed under amber streetlights, washed clean and empty. Somewhere behind him, a 10-year-old girl was breathing steadily in a hospital bed, alive because a soldier had refused to look away when she needed help most. And somewhere in London's sleeping streets, Lance Corporal Tristan Hale walked home through the quiet darkness, carrying the weight of old ghosts and new peace in equal measure. Have you ever walked past someone who needed help because it wasn't your responsibility? Do you think more people would act if they had the training this Royal Guard possessed? And what would you have done if you found Emily in that alley? If this story reminded you that heroes don't always wear capes, sometimes they wear ceremonial red, smash that like button and show some respect for the soldiers who serve. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our daily Royal Guard stories that prove these aren't just ceremonial positions. Share this with someone who needs to remember that doing the right thing doesn't require permission or recognition. Check out our other incredible Royal Guard stories appearing on your screen right now. We'll see you tomorrow with another story that shows what happens when duty meets humanity.